Thank you. The agenda calls for, next item on the agenda calls for public comment, followed by approval of minutes, chairperson's comments, presentation on the preservation by the Preservation Society, park manager's update, discussion of priority matrix, open discussion. Agenda calls for, next item on the agenda calls for public comment, followed by approval of minutes, chairperson's comments, presentation on preservation by the Preservation Society. Park manager's update, discussion of priority matrix, open discussion.
Sarah.
Members are proposing that we alter the agenda to move up the manager's updates after the presentation. If that's acceptable. Right, thank you. So we're now at the public participation. Members are proposing that we alter the agenda to move up the manager's updates after the so we're now at the public participation.
Say a few things. Don't go through.
Hello. Testing, 1, 2. Okay. Looks like we can get away with it now. Okay.
All right.
So has anybody signed up to present as part of public participation? No? Are there any individuals present who would like to? We've got approximately 15 minutes, well now 10 minutes because we lost 5 for public participation. Anyone want to come forward, please do so to the microphone over here. And let's do 2 minutes. Yes, sir. Please give us.
Good. Hello, my name is Shane Dooley. I'm an organizer with Free Palestine Charleston, and there are a few of us here today hoping that we can discuss a ceasefire resolution regarding what is happening in Israel and Palestine. We did send this resolution to members of the City Council, but we are coming here also as we believe that this is something that the Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Commission is for, and so if you would like, we can email this to everyone here, discuss that. I would like to know thoughts. City Council has received these, the documents, but we have not received responses back from most of the members. This is something we've been coming to City Council for several weeks, several months for, and so we would just like to see if there can be some communication. If there are things within the resolution that council does not want to see, we can adjust certain things, but this is something that many community members are very passionate about. The situation is something people in the community are deeply hurt about, affected personally, be they Palestinian, Jewish, Israeli. This is something that affects people, and so we do believe that this would be an important step to take for peace here and abroad. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Please do send us a copy just for the group. This portion of our meeting, we are just listening. There's a portion later on for open discussion where if any of the members of the commission want to make comment about your comments, that'll be the point that is taken up, okay? Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Right, that will end in our public participation section. We have next item is approval of the minutes of the meeting of February 8th.
Motion to approve.
Moved and properly second. Any discussion? Any corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Any abstention? So ordered. In the minutes, it's reflected at our last meeting, we've had conversation about the Board of Architectural Review and proposed amendments. And at the last minute, co-chair Saccharin recommended that we ask the Preservation Society to come forward to provide some context. We also have on your for you a copy of the 4 bullet points for proposed amendments. And at this time, Jason, you want to introduce our guest?
Sure. Thank you, Co-Chair Jerry. So I know we have Sam, who has been with the Preservation Society for 2 years. I've known Sam for a while, and he was in the early discussions as I was making some suggestions to council, which seemed like 10 years ago, but it really is just a year or two ago. But they're here tonight to basically probably give you a bit of history about them, which I think is important, and maybe review the 4 items that we have in front of us, which were some of the suggested changes that we wanted to build into the BAR small. And then I guess also I think I would ask Sam to talk a little bit about what the area we're specifically talking about. I think that gets a little bit confusing for folks. We certainly aren't trying to change anything BAR related south of Line Street and any kind of historic districts south of Line Street. So this is really focused on one specific area. So with that, Sam, if you want to come up and kind of just give us an overview, and you can introduce who you have with you as well. They do have a PowerPoint? Sure. I think there's a.
So I think we just wanted to start off with like a brief history of the Preservation Society. We were founded.
Let me say,
Oh,
Jason,
sorry.
thanks for your nice introduction. I want to introduce my colleague, Madison Lee, who's our community outreach coordinator. Thanks.
Hi. So we were founded in 1920 by Susan Pringle Frost. She was trying to preserve and save the Joseph Manigault House from demolition. So she gathered about 30 residents at that time, and that was kind of the start of the Preservation Society. We are the first grassroots preservation organization in the nation. And in 1931, we encouraged the city to adopt the nation's first zoning ordinance, which established BAR and also the old and historic districts. At the time of our founding, our mission was to preserve old dwellings having historic association from destruction. Today, our mission has shifted to honor Charleston while still supporting the needs of people that live here and work here, as well as maintain the elements that make Charleston, Charleston. That is why in 1957, why we changed our name from the Society for the Preservation of Old Dwellings to the Preservation Society of Charleston. We are a member-based organization. We have 4,350 members from all over the country, but primarily here in Charleston. Our advocacy reflects that of our members. We hold quarterly member meetings and we elect our boards annually. Anyone can join the Preservation Society. This is a list of our key initiatives. You might be familiar with the Carolopolis medallions that are on buildings all across the city, honoring kind of those historic preservation projects that have went above and beyond. Also our historic markers and marker database, Charleston Justice Journey, Cemetery Restoration Project. We are partnering with the city on both the Gullah Geechee Heritage Preservation Project and the Mapping Black Burial Grounds Project to create resources that will be publicly accessible. We also are working on an oral history project, Union Pier, public meeting advocacy, and climate resilience guidelines. Just kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper into what our climate resilience guidelines project is. We recently have seen like an influx of climate related issues and homeowners kind of searching for ways to mitigate these issues. So to respond to the immediate residents' needs, we launched the Climate Resilience Guidelines Project in the summer of 2023. And we see a lot of flooding here in Charleston. And while elevating a property is a great way to kind of mitigate that issue, it can be costly and it can be an extremely overwhelming undertaking. So that's why we've created these guidelines just to kind of find more effective and affordable options for private homeowners. Last fall, we started a survey, collect responses about what residents were feeling, their greatest concerns were with their properties and climate change as far as extreme heat, flooding, and other weather conditions. We've gathered that feedback. We've hired an outside consultant with a broader lens on resiliency. And so we're hoping to have a draft by the end of the summer of this year, which is exciting because this won't only focus on homes downtown, but all across the city, Johns Island, James Island, West Ashley.
Yeah, so thanks, Madison. Oh, can I clicker? So you probably know us from some of our public meeting advocacy too, in addition to the markers and Carolopolis. Just a quick rundown of all the, just to kind of show all the different places we're touching with these key policy items throughout the area, not just in this room, not just in the city, although we do have folks at BAR small right now. I was at County Council earlier this week. Madison is in and out with neighborhood associations all over the city. So I just tell you all that to give you a context for our perspective on how we see preservation efforts throughout the city and the region. Today, we're here to talk, to kind of focus on this area that Jason mentioned earlier. You're likely familiar with the basics of the BAR on the lower part of the peninsula, but the BAR has different authority in the area north of Line Street. So north of Line Street and south of Mount Pleasant Street. That's what's called the Historic Materials Demolition Purview District. That's a mouthful. But the regulations are in place there for removal of historic materials and also complete demolition. So any kind of demolition you could consider demolition. That ranges from small things, selective demolitions, maybe removal of part of a roof to accommodate an addition or something like that. And the BAR regulations north of Line Street, however, do not review new construction or general design characteristics. These rules, as they exist now, have been in place since 2017. There have been some demolition rules in this area for a long time, but the rules that we're focusing on now that are kind of getting more scrutiny are the ones that have been in place since 2017, that demolition purview district. And so knowing all these rules are still new and knowing that if any changes were to be made, they needed to be based on data, we started looking into some of these demolition requests. In 2022, going back to the creation of the demolition purview district, there were about 100 applications for demolition, types of demolition in the district over that time. And we recorded all the different kind of pieces of data we could find for all these different requests, everything from length of ownership, type of owner. We're trying to discern between likely investor-owned properties versus homeowner-owned properties, individual homeowner properties. And it's not perfect, but as a proxy for that, we used LLCs as, and I think looking in some meeting agendas, like where maybe home addresses didn't match the address of the applicant themselves, and length of ownership and the result of the request. And basically what we saw was that despite being a minority of applicants, likely investor-owned properties were having more success at getting their demolitions approved in this district over that period of time, more successful than likely individual homeowners. And so that's just showing us that I think to someone mentioned earlier, but about having the resources to be able to navigate the system, it helps. And perhaps also not surprisingly, these investor-owned properties were also initiating demolitions within a couple years of ownership, while the likely individually owned addresses had been owned for much longer. So the goals that we seek to support and like kind of what do we do with this information, right? Celebrating the architecture and history of these areas. There is the whole reason why these districts exist is to preserve and celebrate what's unique about Charleston, not just architecture, not just history itself, but the cultural significance of what these uptown neighborhoods represent. Educate folks about why we do it, not just the economic or aesthetic benefits, but the environmental benefits too of not demolishing and putting buildings into landfills has an impact. And one thing I think that is key is enhancing communication. There's a perception problem, right, with some of the BAR policies. And I think what a lot of people experience is where that communication kind of breaks down, where it's not clear going one way or the other why things are the way they are. And so in 2022, the city adopted a new policy statement, which kind of helps guide city staff to on how they deal with these requests when they come up when they come across their desks at the Gilliard Center. It's the policy statement for historic materials demolition purview, and it lays out why we do it, where we're doing it, and some key kind of criteria for what the staff considers or what goes to the BAR itself when these things come up. And a key element was allowing flexibility for residents seeking to make sensitive rehabilitations to their historic properties. That was kind of the goal of the change, was to help add some flexibility. And a part of this was an allowance for longtime residents or workforce residents to be able to have some flexibility to have some of those rules, some of those regulations waived or being considered a little bit differently than under the new policy statement, so that there's not this perception that the BAR is a stop sign, right? So we landed on these 4 key things that Jason mentioned earlier or alluded to, and I think someone said they're printed out for you. Great, and we can kind of stop here if you want, and I can go through these a little bit. The holistic review kind of refers to the current state of things where a request for demolition cannot consider what's going to replace it, right? And so if I'm coming to make a request and I want to do something sensible that's pretty compatible with what's there now, the BAR, even if they would like that design or like the use of it, can't, their hands are tied. They can't consider what's replacing it when I'm coming asking for demolition. And so holistic review would put in that step where they can consider what's coming next. Landmarking would be an effort to, Councilman Bell.
Arguably, I should know this, but is this by ordinance or is this by BAR policy?
I'm not sure specific. I think it's in the ordinance, so that they are considering the demolition, the request for demolition as part of the, Jason. Yeah.
What y'all have here, I forget. What y'all have here are suggested edits to the current ordinance. What Sam showed regarding the policy statement, that was an internal change from an administrative side where BAR small and our planning staff could look at as a reference, but it didn't include any of these 4.
These policy statements exist for a number of different administrative tasks that city departments,
right,
specifically the BAR here, are tasked with.
And these changes did not come to council. This is something I worked with the planning department on in 22.
Yeah. And so landmarking is one other alternative. And keep in mind, these bullets that you're reading them were written 2 years ago. And so I think some thinking has evolved a little bit since then, and I think we would probably, I think the sentiment is the same, but might think about these things a little bit differently now. Landmarking would be something where individual properties are recognized for their significance, whether they're architectural or cultural significance. The city already has a landmarks overlay. And so it would essentially treat individual properties. There would be a process for landmarking those properties and be able to send a significant property to the BAR when it might not send its neighbor to the BAR if it's not in the landmark overlay. And then kind of that's designed for significant buildings. And if you're looking at an architectural survey, category 1s and 2s. And then category 3s and 4s, according to this official city architectural survey, is another option of relaxing the standards for those 3s and 4s, according to the survey. And designed to, as Jason, sorry, former councilman, mentioned at the last meeting, trying to keep people in their homes, right? And really targeting, along with the policy statement, which was kind of a stopgap, could be considered a stopgap if more changes are enacted, ways to be able to help folks who just want to make improvements to stay in their homes. And then the last item, which I think is written a little bit differently on the bullets, but I think the intent there was to provide a policy direction forward for buildings that are caught up in heirs properties type situations where the titles aren't clear, and acknowledging that those are a unique policy challenge, not just in Charleston, but all over, and that they do deserve some specific, I think, policy approaches that are and ways to approach those challenges that other structures, other properties don't face. There are a lot more complicated issues associated with heirs properties than a kind of a one fell swoop like changes to the BAR can help, because these are big structural problem. That's a big structural problem that is a challenge that's felt not just in cities, not just in Charleston, but all over. So, and these were kind of just designed as a starting place. You know, we are available as a resource to help work through policy changes, but these were really just kind of to get the ball rolling. And Jason was one of the folks that initiated this years ago, and so here we are again to discuss more. And I think April is going to talk a little bit more about a specific property that has some kind of teachable moments from it also. Yeah. So we are available for questions here or after or whenever. But,
questions? Yeah, April.
Thanks, appreciate it. And I think Adrienne said she's going to send these out, so feel free to get in touch with either of us, and we're happy to help any way we can. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, is that it? Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for inviting me to be here. My name is April McGill. I am an architect and have a small practice here in town. And I'll just start by saying I'm not anti-preservation. I have been practicing architecture in Charleston since I came here in 2004 from college, because I love the buildings and I love the preservation work. So I was asked to come tonight to talk about a particular project that is a north of Line Street project that can hopefully help shed some light on some of the issues. And Sam touched on several of those, which I think at the brunt of it is really about allowing context for certain situations. So I didn't really prepare a fancy presentation or anything, but when I was thinking today about this project, I had to sort of go back and rehash myself the timeline of events so that I could remember what happened. But ultimately, I have a client, Mr. Edwards, who owns a property at 51 Poinsett, which is north of Line Street. This is a property that's been in his family since the late 1800s. He was born in this house, raised there. My understanding is that it was a multifamily property. There were multiple buildings on the property. Over time, people left Charleston. He left. He lives in Washington, D.C. The grandmother who owned it died. I don't know the complete history of why the house was left, but ultimately the house sat vacant for, I think, over a decade. And so the roof had imploded and was, falling apart from the inside. So Mr. Edwards contacted Gianna's department in 2020 to discuss redeveloping the parcel for affordable housing. That's his mission, and his goal was to do a small scale multifamily affordable housing project in the neighborhood that he grew up in. At that time, he started working with another developer who basically took the BA, he was requesting full demo of the structure, had the structural evaluation done, went through the process. They submitted their application, found out that it would not be supported, and then they pulled it. And so he contacted me in June of 2021 to ask if I would be interested in working with him on this. And my background is I work with a lot of sustainable materials, and that was kind of his vision as well, was to do an affordable housing project using sustainable methods. And so I started the whole due diligence process, meeting on site with BAR staff, April Wood from Historic Charleston Foundation, et cetera, and was pretty much told right away, like, you're not going to get demo on this. There's no way that's going to be supported. And so we, from there, we met with the city architect, Tori, as well as BAR staff on a Zoom meeting. And we talked through the vision of the project, that it was going to be an affordable housing project, the challenges with having to restore a house that is this dilapidated, and also to redevelop it as multifamily when you have to meet current codes. You have sprinkler systems, you have certain HVAC requirements, accessibility requirements, things that would be really challenging to try and fit into this one certain framework. Also, the structural report had basically said that, everything, the foundation and everything is compromised. So it'd have to be restored from the foundation up. And so what we discussed with staff was that they would support a partial demo. They would not support a full demo, that they would support partial demo. And that we could tell that there was an original portion of the building up front. And then there was, like a lot of houses where you have an addition here, and then another addition and another addition. So they said, well, if you can preserve the original portion of the front of the home, we would support that. So we said, okay, great. So we moved forward with putting together a BAR application packet. Obviously, you can't, you have to do a lot of due diligence work to even put together the packet. So meeting with zoning, understanding, is the lot redevelopable? What can we redevelop there? So there's a bit of due diligence and conceptual planning work that has to happen to really be able to even see if the project is feasible. So we moved through all of that. We put together the packet. We sent it in to BAR. we got on the agenda and then received an email from BAR staff saying, we cannot support your project. That we were requesting to demo more of the building than what they thought we were going to request. But we had had only talked about preserving the original piece of the house, which is what we had put into our proposal. So we, again, pulled the application, requested meetings to further discuss. We were not able to really ever engage in any dialogue beyond that. And so at that point, we shifted focus a little bit. We spoke with some other people in the city, and we were encouraged at that point to just go to the BAR, ask for full demo, and make a case to the board. And even if staff doesn't support it, we may be able to get the BAR board to approve it. And so that was what my client wanted to do. At that point, he said, well, I don't really want to do partial demo because it's very challenging to try and do multi. And just to be clear too, our proposed redevelopment was to emulate the existing house almost exactly, height, scale, mass, 2-story, redevelop the front exactly as it currently stands. So we were not asking for, a modern glass box or something like that. So we decided to take that pathway forward. So we then began working with Gianna's department. We were Chloe Stuber began working with us at that time to help sort of as a concierge. And we, my client was encouraged to go ahead and register the property with the, can't remember the affordable housing registration to make that abundantly clear. This property is for affordable housing. So he went through that process. We met again with zoning, building, et cetera, et cetera. We put together a whole conceptual plan for the building, even though, again, like Sam said, for this north of line district or the material demolition purview district, they're not supposed to consider context. So they're not supposed to consider what the redevelopment is going to be. We decided anyway, let's just go ahead and do it anyway and put it in front of them so they can see that we are literally trying to preserve the front of this building. There's Philip Simmons ironwork on it that's being preserved. We want to do it the right way. So we put together that packet, and we ended up going to the bar. At this point, we had actually gained the support of the Preservation Society for the project. I can't remember if Historic Charleston, what their stance was at this point, but because the project was being slated for affordable housing, the Preservation Society said that they were in favor of this particular home being demolished. We also had a bit of a financial study done to understand the cost difference in having to restore the building versus build new. And it was pretty significant difference in cost. So, and my client also wanted to rebuild with everything, to meet code, to meet current resiliency standards and those kinds of things. So we presented our case to the board, and we pulled every political string we could. We had every person come to that meeting and stand up and speak in support of it that we were able to. We had Miss Shaw Johnson show up, Carol Jackson, I think Jason showed up. We had a number of people come out and speak in support. And we did, I think we had unanimous approval. But it was made abundantly clear that we are only supporting this because of the affordable housing pathway. So all in all, it was I think almost a 2-year process. And I don't have all of the cost info from Mr. Edwards. I don't know what he paid the previous developer. I don't know what the structural evaluation report cost and some other things, but I know that just our portion was almost $6,000, and that was at a heavily discounted rate. And then there were BAR fees each time we went, each time we applied. I think all in all, the point I'm trying to make is that, which Sam already touched on, there's a big difference between a developer who is able to purchase properties and flip them or turn them into rentals versus a legacy homeowner who has owned a property in Charleston for decades. Through this process, he was also having livability or code enforcement kind of on his back constantly. He asked me to represent him in court. So I went to livability court. I had to let the judge know that we were working on this because he was getting fined each month that he wasn't doing something with the property. And that was also another eye-opening experience. I really it was quite upsetting to see the numbers of people coming up to the judge stand, obviously of low income demographic, trying to hold on to their properties and really being persuaded to, some of them being persuaded to sell their properties because they couldn't keep them up, and
Ms.
people
McGill?
being fined. So, yes.
I'd like to give the commissioners the opportunity to ask you a couple of questions and
Yes.
engage if we could, so if you
Sure.
could conclude your presentation.
Okay.
Well, I said conclude your presentation.
Oh, yes. That's basically it. Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of projects with BAR. I just think we need to have a separate set of rules that can address legacy homeowners, especially anybody that is taking an affordable housing pathway. So it kind of felt like the city's trying to promote affordable housing, but then its own preservation laws was keeping it from being able to happen. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Stephen?
April, thank you so much for your presentation. If, it sounds like this guy has some resources, but if he were a legacy homeowner and maybe didn't have the money to hire experts, it sounds like there's no way he could have navigated this process. Is there any help that you know of that people like that who don't have financial resources and maybe don't have the intellectual resources to get through all of these steps and don't have the political connections that you have in Charleston and could help him with?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if maybe Sam or the preservation groups would know of resources that exist, but no. And when I questioned him on why the house sat for so long, his response was, I'm just now at a point in my life where I can financially do something with this. So I don't know the whole backstory, but yes, he's at a point now where he was able to absorb those costs, but I think the process would be very challenging for, somebody without a professional representing them and being able to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for coming
Sure.
tonight and going through this. So this is the same story in the Post and Courier, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't deal with this a lot because I represent a part of West Ashley that feels DRB, but not BAR. So can you, I guess, help us understand, or Sam and Madison, if you're able to, how representative of I guess how representative is this of what's coming before the BAR and the process they have to go through and the difficulty they have to go through?
For this particular type of project or just
I
in
I understand that
general?
every case is different.
Yeah.
So it might be difficult to answer, but I'm just I guess, trying to wrap my head around the magnitude of the problem.
Yeah, I think what's challenging is that it doesn't really feel like there's a clear set of rules. So it's very subjective. So like in our instance, we were told it would be supported, a partial demo would be supported. And then we would put all the work in to create that packet and then was told that we're actually not going to support it. But there never was really any clear guide, like, well, if you exceed demo past this point, we're not going to support that. So I think it just depends on the case. You know, some can move through really quickly and others are gonna be a lot more complicated.
I hate
Sure.
that we're on opposite sides. This is just
Yeah.
where the microphone is.
Debate.
Yeah, right. I'll say that I think that the Poinsett Street case was kind of emblematic of like a number of issues kind of all coming at once.
Mhm.
To answer your question, there aren't that many cases that have all these issues associated with them. There are cases that have one or two of these issues associated with them. But for the most part, VAR small are fairly routine requests. And like I said, there are 198 demolition requests between 2017 and 2022, like the summer of 22 when we were looking at it. And so these kind of cases are not super frequent, but they happen relatively often.
Does the Preservation Society have a, I guess you'd say grid, a list? How many home sites are potentially in the mix for what we're talking about here? I mean, with modern day technology, I mean, I could go down the street in a couple of weeks and count all the houses and say, okay, this is X is the number of home sites that we're talking about here, and categorize them, you know, they're totally dilapidated or whatever. Are those numbers available?
Well, the district itself is pretty big. And so, you know, these things, like these building conditions change all the time too. And so, you know, they're not getting any younger, I guess, is one answer. But like the district itself, so.
No, I understand
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
it sounds like the answer is no. There is not an inventory.
So the housing priority stat has as a matter of fact, the group met today, I believe. And they have a list of properties and actually mapping of those properties that are related to the inventory of livability, and they talking about demolition and like, so there are those numbers. And I think one of the numbers on the page, they say in 2017, there were like 390 some properties that they were tracking. And in 2024, there's like 194. So those numbers are available. They may not exactly match up to what you're talking about, but as part of the priority stat initiative started by the city as part of the smart data Bloomberg initiative, there are numbers around housing that we can look at.
For what it's worth, and I'm just thinking back to the 2022 timeframe when I think we started taking another look at where these houses were and how many there were around the peninsula. There were a lot more apparently, you know, long ago, and there are fewer now, which is good, but it's still an issue to your point. Yeah.
I'd just like to point out that we're only talking about the peninsula, and the city of Charleston has expanded far beyond the peninsula. And so whatever is done now in this kind of condition is going to lay the groundwork for areas that are going to need the same kind of attention. West Ashley, up in Berkeley County, there's going to be a lot more of this as we start looking to things. So this has got to happen.
And you make a good point, because I guess the point I was going to make is this is just one piece of the issue that we're talking about. Let's not forget, this is not about the number of demo and uninhabitable buildings on the peninsula north of Line Street. This is also about houses that are currently being lived in. When someone wants to repair their roof change their windows. This is the same kind of bureaucratic, murky water that they have to navigate. It does require them to get architects and engineers. So it's not just about the buildings like 51 Point Set. This is about people that live in their home for 30, 40 years, that they own the home outright and want to repair a roof. And BAR says, now you're gonna have to use this roof. And the cost of that roof is 3 times the cost of a shingle roof. And then, so the other point I want to make is, and sadly, and I think it's just, it's not a political point, I think we're probably 15 years too late. So to answer the question that someone had is there a bunch of this going on? Yes, but it's probably something we should have tackled 15 years ago. Particularly around the issue of affordability and gentrification on the peninsula. So that's really what necessitated this conversation for me.
I'm also interested in what happens after a relatively large disaster, and then you have a bunch of these homes and they need some rebuilding. And then you need all the experts, and the people who can't afford the experts, what do they do? I don't know. Is there any thought about what do we do if there's a major, earthquake or flood or hurricane, and a lot of this is going on at once, and everything is, the 3 times more expensive roof is then 6 times more expensive, and you can't get anybody to do it?
I think the biggest suggestion that I've heard repeatedly is allow context for each situation. Who's the applicant? What does the redevelopment look like? What is the situation? And then empower the staff to make decisions, because when we have to everything has to, when they have to sort of look through this little tiny tunnel and they're not allowed to look at context, they're not allowed to consider anything. And then it goes to the board and everybody's wondering what's going to happen. I think the whole process could be simplified if, staff were empowered to be able to make some critical decisions at staff level. But I don't know how that, I know that gets dicey too, but.
So we I'm sorry, are there other commissioners?
I was under the impression, and I don't know where it is, Jason may be able to speak to it more clearly, that they were considering changing current regulations for the BAR so that if people who lived in the kind of property we're talking about needed to make repairs to the property, they could use materials that weren't authorized, or, they were not standing seam, they were shingles or whatever. They were effective, but not preferred. And that as long as the family owned the property, that would be fine. But if it was sold, then whoever acquired the property would then have to bring it up to the standard for the preservation and back to the, and that verbiage is being worked. I don't know the status of it with the city.
No, this is exactly why we're here.
Yeah.
The language that's outlined here was passed on to legal department. Legal department was waiting to hear from planning department. And as you recall, in November, December, we said that this was a priority. We wanted to move this forward to impact on affordability. Why we're talking today, and one of the questions I would have for Sam, I heard you say that there might be modifications or more specificity to the recommendations. We have already approved passing a set of recommendations on to the Community Development Committee. I would like very much for us to have those, if we need to modify these, to do so we can pass them on in a conversation with the chair of the Community Development Committee. He indicated that he did not have anything on his desk or on his radar to address this. And talking to Carol Jackson, who's been participating in the zoning amendment that's going on, that process is much longer. And it'll be sometime in 2025 or 2026 before those amendments are done. So the notion is we want to try and expedite this, even though we're 15 years late.
Some of the things that are being discussed in the zoning code rewrite are formative for this discussion too, like the use of form-based kind of building approvals. And so to your point about and think that would be like the third option on that list is like the 3 and 4 homes, of focusing less on the materials and more on the form. And form-based code is a kind of a national trend or approach to planning that looks more at the building size and form than the use necessarily, and doesn't use not limited to traditional zoning mechanisms for zoning. And so that is part of the discussion for the zoning code rewrite that Charleston's doing right now. And it could be part of the discussion before that, for implementing some kind of creative changes to the BAR. That's a kind of a combination of the 4 items that you see before you, I don't think it'll be a pure down the line of any 4 of those, but maybe a combination of them. So. Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess the challenge that we have is as a commission, we aren't a standing committee. This obviously has got to go through community development, which is the logical place for this to go. I guess I would look over to our new staffers. Like, what's your recommendation on how to start this conversation over? I mean, our planning department, quite frankly, has had this information for 2 years. So it's kind of stalled. So what's the best route to get it unstalled? Yeah, sure. You can sit wherever you want.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. I think the best way to get this kind of unstalled is right here. So, still learning the process here. Adrian, you can back me up and help me out. But how do y'all typically make a recommendation here to a standing committee in terms of an agenda item or a policy change?
So the challenge is we could make a recommendation as a commission, but the challenge then ends up with our legal department having to draft an ordinance with very specific language, because that's why we're at this place where we are. In 2017, the language was not specific enough. So it's up to us to create a recommendation and then give that to legal and the mayor to figure out what that looks like. But then I would recommend ordinance coming back to us for review, and then back to eventually CD for their initial review. But I want us to be able to workshop that ordinance. Is that fair? Because we're here with them. Like, I think there's things that are going to come about that we can add to that ordinance. And of course, it's going to add more time, but I think that's the best way to move forward. So recommendation is us put a recommendation for legal to put a first crack at this, right? Because that's been the challenge. You can just put that anyway. I've done that twice.
So yes, I would say that is going to be the best way to move this forward. Y'all come up with a recommendation. Your chairs, and Adrian, y'all can all workshop it together and then can work with legal staff to have a draft to then bring back to the committee to vouch for us to then to vote forward.
Okay, so bringing it back to us for, I guess the
You
challenge is
want the final to be blessed. So once we have some direction as to what needs to be drafted, and we're happy to work with, with Adrian and with the chairs as to what the direction of the committee is for that first draft. Happy to bring the draft to the committee. Committee can then review the draft, make any edits here on the floor, take it back to legal, however many steps that takes to get the draft that y'all think is the best draft for then council to hopefully approve.
And I would just ask a process question on that too, just for speed and efficiency's sake. Is there a process that y'all have established to be able to get the commissioners to review this in advance of a next meeting, so that you're not, let's say we bring one back and we've got you've got edits.
2-week meetings is an opportunity for us to do that.
But the rest of your commissioners as well, so that everybody has a chance to.
If we identify the fact that, if we identify the fact that's an item that's going to be discussed, the commissioners in the subcommittee can join that meeting specifically.
Perfect.
My thought is that probably on our next agenda, we should have, something that's like a policy statement of what we would want to see in an ordinance, and then send that, like recommend that to community development. I think if community development considers that and agrees, then that creates some sort of forward momentum.
I mean, it's frequent that any sort of amendment or ordinance would go through multiple committees. But I do, it's kind of y'all's leisure, but we're happy, happy to workshop it with y'all in the best way forward.
And I guess I would agree with you, and then Steve and I would have a slightly different opinion, because it's not really just one policy statement. I think we actually have to look at that ordinance and really pick it apart and determine, because we don't want any unintended consequences, which we have now. So I guess for next meeting, or maybe prior to that, if we can distribute the ordinance to this commission, so everyone comes well read to the next meeting, and then we could workshop it at that point, figure out what we want added, what we want subtracted, and we can get that to legal.
Yes.
And you guys can work your magic. And then we'll have to come back to us, because before it comes to CD, I think we should have another crack at it, because I don't want them to send it back to us. Whatever we do as a group, I'd like to just be that final, and that goes to CD. So this is probably going to take, dare I say, a few more months. But we're all patient. So does that sound like a plan to other commissioners? Yeah. All right.
I'll
So,
let the department know we have homework coming.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
so Jason, we tackled you, charged you to take the lead on making certain you heard our cats.
Yep.
All right. Adrian, when's our next leads meeting scheduled for? What we're making reference to is about every 2 weeks,
We meet. Yeah.
we meet with Adrian. That would be the situation where we would bring the information forward. You haven't had done your homework, okay, and then we would workshop it at that point with legal.
By we, you mean every 2 weeks, the chairs and Adrian?
That's correct.
And I would say to Sam and anyone else, it's representing preservation groups. Feel free to send us any, because I think you had mentioned, and I think Jerry had also tacked on. These are just four general ideas. If there's more, I would like to be as detailed as possible. So if you have anything else, just send it my way. Maybe.
And our next lead meeting is next Wednesday, the 20th. So that's rather quickly. So if we needed to schedule another meeting, I need to know that.
My suggestion is that we meet on the 20th to figure out where we are as a consequence of what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, which is a work agenda, and then establish a time frame for jumping on this one, okay? And schedule meetings and get that information out. I apologize to the commissioners I have to leave now, and I neglected to welcome our new commissioner, Brandon Fish, who has joined us and has some great ideas, and I'm going to leave him.
All right. I'm going to actually ask Brandon to say a few words. You come well respected with a reputation, but for some that don't know, if you want to just share some of that.
Well, I can't speak to what my reputation.
It's a very
might
good
be.
one. It's a good.
My name is Brandon Fish. I currently serve as Director of Community Relations for the Charleston Jewish Federation. And in my role at the Federation, I'm responsible for our advocacy and bridge building, relationship building with other groups, with government entities like HARC. Before I worked at Federation, I was a grassroots activist in this community for many years, especially in the areas of racial justice, and worked in politics for a little while, and made my way back to the Jewish community. My family has been here a very long time on one side of my family, and although I didn't grow up here, my generation all found their way back to this city, and I care a lot about the city, and it's really a great opportunity for me to be able to contribute something to the city of Charleston. So I thank you all for bearing with me as I learn the complexities of the Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Commission.
That Jerry obviously had to leave, so we do have our HARC manager updates up next.
Thank you, Jason. So the Hark Manager update is in lieu of time is basically the work plan. So you have that before you. We stated at our last monthly meeting that we were I was going to make sure that I added a column, which is the status column. And I can go through that briefly with you because there are some things that we do need participation on. So I first want to thank our special advisor for community initiatives, which is Mika Gatson sitting right behind me, because she has been added as a support. And so as we begin with our progress report, we know that the 3.1 states about the evaluation of efforts when it comes to city initiatives that are ongoing. Our last meeting, which was February 8th, the racial bias assessment, Bonnie gave an update on that. The bar amendment, Jason did as well, and our union peer liaison, Alvin Johnson, is that point of contact, and Bob pulled up the rear with the Low Country Rapid Transit. Those are ongoing initiatives, and so that status is one that's going to be continuously being built. When you flip the page, the second, community partnerships, which will be by March 25th, that states all of the bullet points are listed there. I'll save you me reading those. Those are basically when we wanted to create partnerships and have one voice when we state what HARC's mission and our vision are. If you notice on the status side, I have some data resources that we are going to be pulling from. And HARC, you are the supporting team in that. And of course, the leads are myself and the chairpersons. And also supporting is the special advisor to the committee, to the community initiatives. Those datas I put over there because they do highlight where disparities are in the multiple diverse dimensions. And if you also, I welcome if you have extra data resources. I know many of you in your respective places may have other resources that we could utilize. That's welcome. And we could also add those. The permanency, we're going to ongoing be working with that because we want to show that our work is being done in order for us to gain permanency. When you come to, we have another number 2, which is community partnerships. That is working with community-based organizations and having them attend our meetings. So like today we had Ms. McGill and we had the Preservation Society, and I have that as ongoing and have those listed as well. We also are going to be reaching out to the neighborhood associations. We know that we have a neighborhood business administrator here at the city, and I have a database that I obtained from her with neighborhood presidents. When you flip your page, that is when we need participation. I highlighted that area because we're going to need community liaisons, 2 of them, and they will be attending the neighborhood meetings. And we have those bullet points there of what those responsibilities are when you're raising points and connections. So that's something that we would need volunteers with that on, Jason. We would need some volunteers for that particular one. And you could think about it and get back with me. And then number 3, again, evaluation. We're still reviewing if HARC is moving forward with a certain proposal for the Raleigh Center. We know we want to have key performance indicators, and that is under review. And once that becomes either confirmed or move to another slot, then we would schedule a meeting. When it comes to participation of local assessments, so that in part is when we partner with other organizations. Many times it's said that there are other people who are doing the same work, so it would behoove us to partner with certain organizations. We are looking to partner with those those organizations when it comes to assessments. June speaks of permanency, and then 1.3, nothing changed there, except for we're creating more support with the special advisor with community initiatives when we're engaging interns for special projects. But that is the same language that the work plan has always had. And then by December 31st, we're looking at, by that time, we need to have a semi-annual forum where we have co-hosts with another organization. That right now is to be determined because we can have more discussion about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Any questions for Adrian on the report?
Good job. Thank you.
Moving on, we do have about 18 minutes left. I do want to thank Mika and Logan for being here, staff for the city. Obviously, Adrian's always here, but having their support and ears and eyes is very helpful and very supportive. So thank you for both being here. Last up, we did move our chairperson comments to this portion of the meeting. We do have the priority matrix, but
We have the priority matrix.
Yeah.
We just wanted to keep it on the agenda, but there hasn't been any changes as of yet. Correct, Carol? We haven't, right, we're still working on
All
it.
right.
So we just wanted to keep it in front of everyone.
And then last up, we just wanted to be respectful and also acknowledge some of our guest speakers for coming in today. I'm not sure if your first name again. Yeah, Shane, thanks for coming. I certainly have some comments on that, but I'd like to open it up to my fellow commissioners. Any comments, open discussion on the public participation or anything about today's agenda?
Just before we get into that, I wanted to do a quick update on history. The History Commission also meets, and I just wanted to let everybody know that in the last two meetings, they've approved 3 of the historical markers. One was for the Huguenot Church. I've seen the paperwork. It was something like 55 pages of documentation, so I didn't think anybody'd want to have me clog up their inboxes. The other 2 plaques that were approved were for Thomas Tobias Carr Sr., who was the last mayor of Maryville, West Ashley. And the other one that they did along with the Huguenot Church one was for Clement Harold Richardson, who's also going to be honored with a plaque out in the Maryville at the Carr Richard. It cut off on the edge of my printout, sorry, but the park in Maryville that the city's doing there. So significant to this commission and some nice plaques that have been approved, and just thought y'all would like to know about that. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Speaking of that, when I was council member, Asheville, Maryville was in my district, District 3. So I had a, humbling opportunity to speak with members of that particular community and the neighborhood. And I would urge anyone here that doesn't know the history of Asheville, Maryville to do a quick Google search. And it really does speak to the work that we do here for the commission. I'm not going to go into all the details, but it was a thriving African-American community. They had their own bank system. They had, many of their own dentists, doctors, and it was a thriving community. By statute, I believe the state of South Carolina disbanded it, and obviously for reasons that some of us are aware of, and some of us might think unintentional, but it was very intentional for what happened. So when we talk about issues of race, particularly in this commission, that wasn't too long ago that those things occurred, and I just wanted to throw that out there for folks to Google it. It's pretty. I want to say just interesting, but it's disturbing.
The charter was revoked in 1937.
Yeah, so not too long ago. But with that, I do want to acknowledge any other comments, particularly for today and some of the comments that were made. Go ahead, Brandon.
Sure. And, I always think that when people come forward to city commissions and councils, that they ought to be acknowledged and responded to. And I represent in my work a community that's directly impacted by what's happening in Israel and Gaza. When I say directly impacted, I mean, people have family members over there. My family members were held hostage on October the 7th. They had family members who were killed. Luckily, thank God, my family is doing okay. A lot of people are not. And there's a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza. It's an honor to be able to serve on this commission, as I said before, and as a member of the Jewish community. I just said this. I feel compelled to respond to some of the calls for the city to pass a resolution condemning Israel and demanding a ceasefire. Such a resolution would obviously offend a big Jewish community throughout the city of Charleston, and add another name to a growing list of cities whose resolutions both Israel and Hamas are likely to ignore. But it's my hope that we can choose a different path here in Charleston. Many other city council chambers have devolved into forums for shouting matches and physical confrontations, and they've become microcosms mirroring the conflict that we see overseas. Charleston's thus far kept this kind of chaos at bay. One of the reasons for that is because under the guidance of the organization that I work for, our Jewish community has chosen not to attend city council meetings and engage directly with protesters. We don't think that city council is necessarily the appropriate venue for arguments about international affairs, but here at HARC and here in the city of Charleston, we do have an incredible opportunity to do something constructive that other cities and nations haven't been able to do. We could acknowledge the hurt in our impacted communities, be they Jewish or Muslim, and seek to provide relief and resources. There are plenty of resources available. We can foster discussions that lift up humanity of Israelis and Palestinians and Charleston Jews and Muslims. We can acknowledge that both of our identities and ties to that little piece of land are legitimate and need not exist at the expense of or in conflict with each other. We have the opportunity to model the kind of peace and civil discourse that we'd want for our loved ones in Israel and Gaza. We can choose for the city to be a catalyst for unifying action rather than dueling resolutions that hurt or divide community members. We can serve the impacted people right here in our community. There is no reason that in Charleston there should be any conflict between our Jewish and Muslim communities. We face many of the same challenges, and in many cases, we have taken them on together. There has never been a wedge between us in the past, and I hope that the city doesn't become part of advancing anything that would inspire one. I've been given to understand that HARC is intended to be the vehicle for impactful policy that promotes human affairs and racial conciliation in our city. Conciliation doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. There are too many people in the city impacted by systemic injustice, and we have an opportunity to advance concrete change. I hope that we can negotiate policy that impacts Charlestonians, and I hope that we can allow an Israeli-Palestinian ceasefire to be negotiated by Israelis and Palestinians. Peace is a mutual commitment, and it needs to be made by those who choose it instead of war. I thank you all who came to speak today. I speak regularly with Shane and Marcus McDonald, who's a friend of mine. And I'm glad that they chose to come out today, and I hope that we can get together and work on things that can really positively impact our communities here in Charleston.
Thank you, Brandon, for those comments. Anyone else? Any other comments for today? My last comment, and then we'll be out of here with a couple of minutes to spare. I did provide comments. I think it was my last council meeting when we had some folks come and speak to council regarding the atrocities on October 7th. And I do agree with Brandon, from a political standpoint, I'm a former council member. I think there's a symbolic significance for a resolution, but that's all it really does from a political standpoint, policy standpoint. The city coming and asking for a ceasefire will probably have no bearing on what our U.S. foreign policy and the administration does. But I would request and ask that this body, this commission, be the vessel for discussions. I think that's one thing we can do, is be a place for folks to come and speak freely and authentically about their opinions. My dad was born in Israel, and I have family still in Nazareth, and I'm half Palestinian, as I said. So I understand the history of that region, just like Brandon understands the history of that region. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, that Americans are finally starting to understand that, there's more to it than past 10 or 15 or 20 years, whatever they're seeing on the news, that what happened on October 7th was horrible and atrocious. And I would hope that anyone that's coming here to this council to ask for a ceasefire acknowledges that. And that's what I didn't hear the first time. And I'll just be completely frank. The night that y'all came, I didn't hear any sense of shared humanity. It was, here's what's happened. We're calling for a ceasefire, which I get. And I will say that was in November. If everything that's transpired the past several months, clear to me that something needs to be done. If we want to call it a ceasefire, we can call it a ceasefire. But the pictures and the video that you see on nightly news are absolutely unthinkable. And I would ask the Jewish community to acknowledge those same things. So if we're going to have a conversation as a commission and comes to council, I would ask both sides to acknowledge the atrocities that are occurring. 1 in 4, or is it 3 in 4 Palestinians that are living in Gaza will be suffering from food shortages and starvation. You know, we're in 2024, and the world, to me, seems to be blind to the plight of the Palestinians. And this is nothing against the Israelis and the Jews, but it seems to me that the world is just completely turned their back. And I think we all have to acknowledge that there are, it's a chess game, you know, it's a political chess game. So I hope our commission could provide opportunities for people to have discussions here locally. I would encourage the local Palestinians or Muslims that we have in Charleston to come out. I get a sense that, and I'll say this because I'm not an elected official anymore. I get a sense that, you know, the night that we had the event here on the steps, you know, as a half Palestinian and someone that understood the history, of course, we wanted to stand united with our Jewish brothers and sisters. But I saw Palestinians, or I saw Arab Americans and Muslims. And I think one other thing that we need to acknowledge and understand that not all Arabs are Muslims. I think that's a misconception. I'm one of them. My dad was raised as a Christian. So this whole idea of religions pitting up against each other is a false narrative. Anyways, I don't want to go on a tangent. My point is that evening I saw 2 or 3 Arab Americans. I don't know if they were Muslim. I don't know what. And they were there protesting. And I was just thinking to myself, what were going through their heads? What were they thinking about? And I felt bad. I felt bad. And my point is, I don't know if the Arab community here feels empowered and safe enough to say what they want. And I think that's partly a responsibility for all of us to bear. So anyway, Brandon, we're really happy to have you because I think you're going to add a unique perspective. Please continue to come to these meetings and let's open the dialogue. So I think it's important. And I really want to extend the olive branch to our Arab brothers and sisters here in Charleston to come to these meetings and share their stories. Stephen?
I thought I think you made a really good point there. I think what we can do in this body and in city council is make sure that everybody who lives in Charleston knows that their city has their back. We can't and shouldn't, I think, speak to international issues. I just don't think it's our place. I don't think we have the expertise. I don't think it's what our constituents elected us to do. When I went door to door, I didn't talk about Israel. I talked about zoning and flooding and things that are really important that we need money from the state to deal with, money that could be jeopardized if they look at Charleston and say, why are they opining on international issues? Not to say that they have a good point there, but I know how politics work. So I would welcome this conversation on those terms. And I would ask, frankly, for a little bit more respectful dialogue than what we've gotten at city council. I've never responded at city council because our rules prevent it, by the way. No, I do not want to starve babies. Can we just agree on those terms? Can we see each other as humans and talk? Is that fair? All right, thank you.
I totally agree with the things that have been said. I mean, we're all brothers and sisters here in Charleston and on this commission. And we want the best for the people who live here. But I do have a concern about this commission getting involved in international events. Are we going to have also something for Ukrainians? And we're going to do a resolution for Ukraine? Are we going to do a resolution for Uyghurs in China?
I'm sorry, can we have some decorum?
So for me, that, that's a concern. I totally agree that we need to be a body where we can come and talk, but the reality is, we can put ourselves into a situation where that's all we're doing is dealing, and as Stephen said, we weren't appointed to be an international body. And so for me, that's a concern. I have no problem with talking, and having civil conversations and debates and discussions. But again, it can create a real issue with time and, what we spend our time doing.
Well, just given the last 2 minutes, this is an issue that is very sensitive to all of us. And I would respectfully ask us to, we'll reconvene, or we will adjourn in a few minutes. But I think we need some time to think about what our role is. And I respectfully disagree regarding our role. We are not, you're right, we're not an international body. But I think if we focus that prism through Charlestonians, I can tell you this, representing North Central, the North Central Mosque was in my district. Those are my constituents. So you're right. And I have to disagree. They have every right to express their concerns about what's happening. They are my constituents. Do we have any authority to change anything internationally? Probably not. All I'm suggesting is we use this body as a place for people to come speak authentically about the challenges that they're facing, because many of those folks could have family members that are there. And that's all I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting we send a letter to the White House or do anything internationally, but I am saying we are the Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Commission. Like, if it doesn't start here, then we need to pack this thing up and call it a day. That's my feeling. That's just my personal feeling.
I think he's referring to
Like a
keep it
resolution.
local. Keep it
Yeah,
local.
absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
And
I-
Charleston does have a history of doing that.
Right.
But Bonnie was
Yeah.
raising her hand.
And
a while
a
back.
question, then we got to adjourn.
On the issue of what the city can do, I just want to say, since we have a new administration, I was one of the HARC members who attended the rally for Israel that was out front. And I was probably during even that rally unhappy that I had attended it. I think it was something probably that the city should not have done. And I was particularly distraught by a South Carolina senator who came and was pretty warmongering at that event. And so I think the city should really carefully consider statements on those kind of events in the future.
Thank you, Bonnie. It is 6:31. And we appreciate the conversation. So I would ask all of us to kind of take a breather. We'll come back obviously next meeting. And I would encourage you all to continue to come to these meetings. Anything else to come before the body this evening?